I've got 6 o'clock, so 6 o'clock. I call this meeting of the Saginaw City Council to order. Please rise for the pledges. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible. Item number 2 is the invocation. For that, we've got City Councilmember Charlie Tucker.
Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for all that you do for us. We thank you for the city that we live in. Please keep it safe. Please keep everyone here safe. Bless everyone that's here tonight. In your name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Charlie. Item 3 is audience participation. That's covered on the screen. Also, if you would like to speak on any posted topic, contact the city secretary and she will allow you to speak. Please silence your cell phones, devices, etc., so we can have a nice, quiet meeting. I'd like to welcome any folks that are watching online. Hello. I hope somebody is. If you are, send us a note. Let us know how the video and audio quality is. I would like to get some feedback. All right, item number 4 is the consent agenda. Item A, action regarding approval of minutes, May 21st. B, action regarding moving City Council meeting scheduled for July 16th to July 23rd. Any questions? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
Mayor, I'll make a motion that we approve the agenda.
I'll second that.
All in favor, raise your right hand. Those opposed? Let the record reflect we do have a quorum. Mr. Farr and Mr. Flory are out this evening. Item number 5, recognition of members of the Mayor's Youth Advisory Council. It says Todd Flippo, but I think we're going to go with Pedro first, right?
Thank you and good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Pedro Zambrano. I'm the City Administrative Intern here at Saginaw. I had the privilege of working with the Mayor's Youth Council. It was the first one. In January, we started off, and they learned about the council manager form of government, and they also toured the rec center and the library. And then in February, they had the privilege of going to the fire department and to the police department, where they learned about our public services there. In March, they also went to Public Works, and they also toured a water treatment facility where a lot of them learned where our water comes from. And in April, we had the opportunity of having a community service project where we helped out citizens and residents of Camelot Square. And lastly, if y'all were here in May, they did a presentation to the council talking about some agenda issues and also bringing up some ideas for a potential bond project. And now I'm going to present them up here. So I'm going to call their names.
I want to stop you real quick. I want everybody to say hi to Pedro. Pedro just got married, so congratulations, sir. Let's give him a hand. All right.
So far, so good, by the way. All right, Kyle Bentz.
We taking pictures? What are we doing? Are we taking a group picture? Individual or group?
An individual picture.
Okay.
Awesome. All right, Alyssa Greensing. All right, Joseph Hurling.
We have a certificate as well and a letter of recommendation. Both here together for the students.
Diana Hernandez. By the way, Diana graduated from Saginaw High School, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, congratulations. Oh, goodness. I know Logan. See, you know what I'm talking about. Slobodin. All right, Julia Soto. And Juliet also graduated from Saginaw High School. Toby Tucker. Liam Walker. Let's go and take a group photo. I didn't miss anybody, right? We're good? All right.
So we mentioned earlier, this was our inaugural Mayor's Youth Council. We will have another one. It was very well received. We'd love feedback from any of the students, how we can make it better next time, but it was a very good experience, and Gabe, I appreciate you and Pedro putting this together. It was, I know, a lot of work, but it was a great experience for us as well as the students, so great program. Anything else you want to add on this? We good? Okay. All right. Item number 6, consideration and action regarding recommendation from Advisory and Recreation and Parks Board regarding the 4th of July parade and fireworks activities. For that, Rick Trice.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. You'll recall earlier this year you authorized $10,000 for a fireworks display to be held on Saturday, July 6th. Park Board's been talking since then on ways to enhance that, so they've come up with an additional program that we want you to consider for approval tonight. I'm going to go ahead and kind of read through that so the public that may be listening will be understand what may be going on or will be going on, hopefully, with your approval that Saturday, July 6th. There's going to be a parade, a morning parade, which will be essentially the same route that was scheduled for our Christmas parade that got canceled. We'll begin at the Willow Creek Elementary, and we'll go to the Development Center. That parade will start at 10 a.m. Saturday morning. No fee for parade entries. Park Board and others will be soliciting floats, and we'll keep it to a maximum of 25 vehicles. If that is rained out for some reason, that will be delayed to the following weekend, July 13th. And then for the fireworks activities later that evening, we're going to have, of course, at the high school, the parking lot will be open at 6:30. The event will formally begin at 7. They're going to have a DJ. We're soliciting food trucks to be present that evening, and then, of course, the fireworks to begin around dusk. So the Park Board is asking authorization of use of $2,500, not to exceed amount. That'll cover portable toilets, hand sanitation, trash bins, and other things. And of course, the police will be there will have a presence at the activity that evening. So the financial impact's $2,500. The Park Board Fund has funds a little north of $90,000, so plenty of money in that fund. And so that we, again, ask for your authorization for the use of that money for that event.
All right, council, any questions? I think it sounds great. I like that they're using the park board money for this as well.
Yes.
That's what it's for.
Yes.
Any questions, council? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
Mayor, I'll make a motion that we go with we approve it for the park boards for the $2,500 for the 4th of July parade.
All right, a second. Cindy, second. All those in favor, raise your right hand. All those opposed, there are none. Thank you, Rick. Thanks to the park board as well.
Yes.
Moving forth, at 6:11 p.m., we're recessing into a workshop. Item number 8 is fiscal year 1920 budget workshop, drainage utility fund, donation fund, and general ESCO. For that, Kim Quinn.
Thank you, Mayor and City Council. You'll notice that the slide looks a little bit different than what was in your packet. I've added a little bit more detail at the request of a council member to show the revised budget numbers and the year-to-date. It gives you an idea of how we're doing so far this year and may make the estimated column a little more sense. So that's why it looks a little bit different. The numbers are still the same. We're going to go council meeting by council meeting to talk a little bit more in depth about the different funds. So we'll talk about 3 tonight. One of them is the Drainage Utility Fund. As I've explained in the past, the Drainage Utility Fund is the fund that we collect the $5 that most residential customers pay, and non-residential customers pay a drainage utility fee too, but it's a calculation based on the square footage and the number of units. The residential is a $5 flat fee. The money is collected in the Drainage Utility Fund and spent for drainage utility expenses. And so this is the budget. This is where the money is collected, and this is where the money is spent for drainage utility. In the Drainage Utility Fund, we pay for 2 drainage maintenance workers. So they're the ones that go out and clean the drainage channels and keep the drainage channels mowed so they work like they should. It also funds half of the environmental specialist and half of an environmental assistant. Those positions are in the utility fund, and their duties are also, they are responsible for water duties, but they also we have to do certain testing to be in compliance with state drainage regulations. So they do testing for drainage as well. So that's why half of their salary is paid out of the Drainage Utility Fund. This is no different than what's currently being done. Equipment for the maintenance of drainage channels is also included in this fund. Next year in 1920, they're wanting to replace a boom arm mower with a tractor. Those are those big mowers that they use to mow the drainage channels. There's also a service truck scheduled to be replaced and a stormwater meter. In this current year, in fact, I think it was last council meeting, you approved engineering for Phase 2 and Phase 3 of East Cement Creek Drainage Project. We've been saving up money in this fund for quite some years to fund that big drainage project. So the engineering was approved and should get done this fiscal year, and construction is scheduled for next fiscal year for Phase 2 of that project, and Phase 3 will be in fiscal year 2021.
And that's the $1.2 million in there is for
Yes,
this
sir.
project?
Yes, sir. That would be the construction of Phase 2 of the East Cement Creek Drainage Project.
Will you explain, or maybe Rick can explain to everybody just what that drainage project entails?
That project is primarily the channel that's just to the west of here, actually crosses McElroy between the police station and the library, and will come around back to Opal Street. So that's essentially the project. There were earlier phases that went southeast of there, but
How far are we going, or how long is it? What's the linear distance on this phase? I don't remember.
Yeah, we could look it up and get back to you, but I mean, probably a couple of thousand feet.
Okay, I knew it was quite a distance, but I was just trying to get a feel. Okay. Kim, sorry to interrupt. Keep going.
That's okay. Are there any other questions? That's really the highlights of the Drainage Utility Fund. Are there any more questions that you have about this fund? The numbers will change somewhat over this summer, but we're just presenting the big issues, as we get better estimates. Certainly probably the personnel costs will change some, but this is based on our best assumptions that we have today. Okay. If there aren't any more questions on drainage utility, we'll go to donations fund. The revenues that go into the donations fund are primarily the $1 for beautification, parks, and library that we collect on the utility bill. We, this fiscal year, changed all three of those donations to the $1 level. It's purely voluntary. And we were happily surprised that a lot of our citizens elected to continue to donate even with the increase. We had some that backed out, but we had more customers that added on than we had that backed out. So that was a good thing. The estimate, and that is why the estimate in the current year is higher. We assumed that there would be more that elected not to do the donation than actually did. So that's a positive thing. In fact, we have 83% that donate to beautification and 80% donate to parks and library. So at least 80% donate to one or the other of the optional donation categories. We also have donations for animal services, the senior center, police, and fire, but the major ones are the beautification, the parks, and the library. The expenditures that are funded with these donations in animal services, it's a vaccination program and animal care is paid for here. In the library has 2 summer interns that are funded with donations during the very busy summer months when they can use the extra help. They also pay for their special programs, some supplies and subscription fees, software licenses out of their donations that they receive for the library. In the beautification, out of beautification donations, they pay for some mowing along Saginaw Boulevard and Blue Mound Road. There's there's a painting cycle for the light poles that we fund partially out of this beautification donations, seasonal landscaping, holiday decorations. All of those are continuations of what we currently already do. There is a proposal in the fiscal year 1920 budget to begin funding arts in public places. I think just recently, I don't remember if it was last council meeting or the meeting before that, there was a presentation on it, and so there's a proposal to fund $25,000 for the beginning of an art in public places, public art. Senior Center.
I'm sorry, Kim. Remind me how many, we do 10 light poles a year. How many light poles do we have in the city? We've talked about this in the past. I bet Dolph knows.
I don't know the exact number, but the majority of them are newer and are the galvanized poles that don't require painting. However, in some of the older sections of town, we've got the old steel poles that rust after time, and we paint those. So we're able to keep up pretty much doing, I believe, don't we split the funding here, 10 here and 10 somewhere else, maybe in public services? So,
in general fund.
so we're doing 20 a year, which we're able to keep up.
Keeps up. Okay.
I want to say, just off the top of my head, I think it was they were planning on an 8 to 10 year cycle of painting.
Okay. I was just curious. Thank you.
The Senior Center collects donations, and they use that for supplies for their different programs. And then the fire department is really good at soliciting donations that they use to fund the annual Easter egg hunt and their fire camp. And as you heard earlier, this year you've got fireworks that will be the end-of-year budget modification will reflect those expenditures as well. Are there any questions in the donations fund? Okay, then we'll move on to the general escrows. The general escrow fund collects revenue that is for a specific purpose. So these are revenues that we collect that are supposed to be spent for a specific thing, and that's why it's not part of just the general fund, but it's not significant enough to have its own fund. They're usually, in the overall scheme of things, small dollar amounts. So they're lumped together in the general escrow fund, but they're accounted for separately because we need to spend the amount that we collect, for example, for hotel motel tax, on only very specific things. So those are the kinds of things that are collected and paid for out of the general escrow fund. Again, you've got the columns that show the budget, the revised budget, year-to-date, estimated, and then the planning for fiscal year 1920. One of the changes that is proposed in the fiscal year 1920 budget is to increase the support, the city's support for the Chamber of Commerce. We currently do $5,000 annually, and $10,000 is being proposed for next fiscal year. In this,
Council, hold on, Kim. Council, any questions or comments on that specific item? We talked about that a little bit. Are y'all okay with that, doubling that? I mean, 5,000 is not much, 10,000 isn't much either, but we talked about it before. Mary, go ahead.
I'm sure we've had discussions with the chamber, and does it seem like that will actually be enough to help them, or when will we find out?
Mr. Mayor, so council, there's some restrictions on the use of those funds. We can't necessarily use that to support their operations, but they do serve as our tourist, what do we call it, tourist bureau?
Tourist Visitor Center?
And visitor center. So our involvement is not to necessarily support their operations. It's a contractual agreement where they provide tourism type services. There are a couple special events. The 24 Hours of Saginaw was just a few weekends ago. So they use the depot to watch trains and use the facilities. So we'll amend at a future council meeting, lease agreement with the chamber to try to help out with them. But that's the 10,000, what it's used for.
Thank you, Kim. Go ahead.
Sure. So that's the big change in the fiscal year 1920 budget. This is also where we use a portion of hotel motel tax. We can use that for anything that's going to promote people coming in from out of town, and so we have some funding in there for the Train and Grain Festival, as well as the donations that people have given for the festival. That's accounted for in this fund. So there's a budget in there for that. We also collect court technology and court security. So part of the fines that people pay, if they've gotten a ticket, $4 of that we collect and can be used for court technology. We will replace 2 ticket writers with that next year. And court security is $3 per ticket, can be used for court security. We use those funds to pay for bailiff overtime, the police officers that act as bailiff for court days. And then the other thing that we have in here, which is an ongoing expenditure, are insurance deductibles. So when we collect from someone's insurance for something that they've damaged, maybe they ran over a light pole, we collect from their insurance company, it goes into this fund, and then we'll pay for the replacement or whatever we have to pay for with those funds. And that's the insurance one is one that fluctuates obviously from year to year, so we budget just based on average. It can fluctuate, though, from year to year. Are there any questions on the general escrow fund?
Thank you, Kim.
Okay, you're welcome.
Well done. All right, so moving on. That is all of item number 8. So moving on to item number 9, TERS feasibility report. Gabe, do you want to get a preamble to this?
Yeah, Mayor and Council, a few months back you approved a feasibility study to look at a taxed increment reinvestment zone. So David Pettit is with us this evening, as well as staff, to discuss what they found on their feasibility study and hopefully answer any questions you might have about the financing mechanism for the zone.
Mr. Manager, Mayor, and Council, thank you so much. My name is David Pettit. We are going to do a little bit of a tag team. I brought my partner, Natalie Moore, and she's going to do the first part of the presentation, kind of explain the overall concept of tax increment financing, and I'm going to run through some of the specifics related to the TERS feasibility relating to along Main Street, and then answer some of your questions. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Natalie.
Hello, good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you so much for having us today, and thank you to Alora and Gabe for the opportunity to be here with you tonight. As David mentioned, we're going to begin just really going over the concept of tax increment financing before going over the feasibility analysis that we put together, and then we'll talk about some of the next steps and then have an opportunity to answer any of your questions. Again, of course, if you have any questions as we're going through the presentation, please just let me know. So tax increment financing, or financing if you feel particularly fancy, is a tool that facilitates economic development within a tax increment reinvestment zone. So we are based out of Fort Worth. There they call them TIFs. The proper term is really to call it a TERS. TIF is the actual mechanism and the concept of tax increment financing. So if you hear us say TIF or TERS, really we're talking about the zone, the district, and the boundaries within it. It's governed by the Texas Tax Code, Chapter 311. The statute does have very specific things and processes of how to create a TERS, how to use it. So there is a level of governance there for your comfort and for you to use. Cities alone or in partnership with other taxing entities can use this. It typically is the city that leads the charge, but another taxing entity, a county, could move forward with it. Taxing entities could contribute ad valorem taxes received from incremental value increases on property within the TERS. That's really the most important thing. It's a contribution of incremental taxes within the TERS into a specific fund, and we have a nice graphic that will kind of make that really clear on the next slide. But what can a TERS pay for? What are you collecting these funds for? It's the cost of public works, public improvements, economic development programs, or other projects benefiting the zone. And we'll get a little bit more specific about what that means as we go through the presentation. So you can see here in the purple on the bottom, that's the base ad valorem, that's the base value of the TERS. And that is established as of January 1 of the year that you create the zone. So if you are to consider creating it today, the base value would be whatever the property's value was January 1 of this year. Then in 2020, you immediately begin to collect incremental ad valorem, and that's what's in that kind of light yellow shaded triangle there. That's the incremental value. So for the period of time that the TERS is in place, any incremental value above and beyond the base value goes into that orange triangle, that TERS fund. And then when the TERS terminates, all of the additional value will go back into the general fund, and then the benefit of those property values being increased will go to the general fund, and that's what you see there, the new project ad valorem in that gold color.
I have a question. Is there any, the duration, is there any set rules on how long the duration should be, or are there any guidance on durations? How does that work?
Well, and I'll let David pop in here. I think generally we haven't seen any that are less than 15 years. Typically they're more 25 to 30 years. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. But because of you have essentially from the time of assessment of January 1 until you collect those tax revenues, that's about 13 months. And so we typically have 3 to 5 years until you start to establish a fund balance. And so about the shortest we've seen is 15. We've seen them go as long as 40. The Trinity River Vision in Fort Worth is pushing out, and I think they're even asking for 50 because it's taking longer for that increment to occur than what was originally projected.
And one of the nuances that this graphic doesn't necessarily really capture is that this is assuming that all of the additional increment value goes into that light yellow triangle. Really, typically, it might be a negotiated rate. It could be 50, 75%, or 100% of the incremental value. And we have some examples to show you what that might look like. But that's something to keep in mind, and that's something that we took into account when we were doing our feasibility analysis. And David will present a slide that shows you some different scenarios. If you were to contribute 50% of your increment or 75% or 100, what does that kind of look like?
If I can just add, this is the academic chart, and so it doesn't take into consideration. This is assuming 100% of your ad valorem going into the TIF, and what we're seeing is anywhere between 25 and 75%. Very rarely are we seeing 100% contribution unless cities are really, really dedicated to seeing a specific project completed. So this is the academic. We're going to show you a couple of options on participation levels. And what I always like to say is 50% of something is better than 100% of nothing. And so you might hear me say that a couple of times when I come back.
So the different entities can do different amounts?
Yes,
that's correct.
Okay.
And it can even, not to get too into the weeds, I know this is kind of a preliminary overview, but you can really even do it 100% for the first 5 years, 75% from 5 to 10, and it can be scaled, and you have options there. So there's two ways to create new tax increment, either new construction being built within the zone and also just natural organic growth of the properties. We all know that our home values tend to go up, property values tend to go up. That increment that occurs over time naturally, that is contributing annual appreciation into the TERS fund. Sure, of course.
I'm going to really let her get into this, but as you know, the state just passed a cap on what you can grow. So when you calculate your effective rollback rate, whatever is in a TERS is subtracted from that. So it is essentially sheltered from that growth cap. So whatever is in that TERS, so we have had some cities, one in North Texas that went from 4,000 acres to 12,000 for the sole purpose, not the sole purpose, but to be able to shelter some of the growth that's going in there and not be capped at that 2.5%.
I know. It's fine.
I bet he does again. What do you bet?
Yeah. No more than 10. All right. So again, just another graphic to visually represent. So as development occurs, then there's increased property values. Of course, if it's brand new ground up construction, that's going to go from a very low taxable value to, obviously having something improved on there. The increased property values lead to tax increment, which that tax increment, in theory, will then be used for TERS improvements, which would then spur further development. And then you can see how the cycle would continue with the TERS improvements leading to increased development, which would increase the property values within the TERS to be used again.
And how are TERS improvements defined?
And it's listed in the statute as to what a TERS funds can be used for, but really TERS improvements in this graphic would be anything that the TERS contributes to a project that they support. And so that could be public improvements, oftentimes streetscape, roads, utilities, anything that you would typically think of as public works. But then it also could be an economic development grant. So it can be I'm just anticipating it. All right. Okay, there you go. So why would we even go down this road? Why would you create a TERS? One of the key times to create a TERS is when private development is imminent. So if you know that there's going to be a serious investment in your community and you're able to capture that increment right away or within a short time frame, then that's a great time to create a TERS so that you have a low base value, and any increment that comes on in the future will immediately be able to be realized into the tax increment reinvestment zone fund and then can be reinvested in that area. It provides a funding source without impacting the current amount of general fund revenue. So we like to say, barring an extreme example, you're not going to get less than you're getting today. You've established the base, and as property values go up, then those future incremental values are what you're kind of playing with, if you will. You're not dipping into funds that are currently going into the general fund. This is a huge one. It's the ability to leverage revenues from taxable property within the TERS to generate a large increment. What we mean by that is you can leverage the revenues from other taxing entities. And so often in Tarrant County will come to the table, and I think that's something definitely worth exploring here, and it's something we included in our feasibility analysis. So really, the county or whatever taxing entity is partnering with you, they are saying we're willing to give you a portion of our incremental revenues within that zone, and the city or the TERS board would then be able to determine what the best use of those funds is. And so not only are you kind of, again, not playing, but utilizing your own funds, but funds from other taxing entities. It attracts potential developers and investment into an area that might not otherwise occur. And David and I are very lucky to count among some of our clients, not only cities like yourselves, but also what we like to call well-heeled developers that have a lot of experience developing throughout the state of Texas. And a lot of them are very accustomed to working with cities that have tax increment reinvestment zones, and they're familiar with this mechanism. They feel comfortable. Their lenders are comfortable with this mechanism, and it allows them to have that level of comfort of entering a market that they might not otherwise feel comfortable entering. And it demonstrates a commitment to creating a sense of place and identity. Like I mentioned, we're here from Fort Worth, and downtown and the near south side are two areas that both have TIFs that have really been utilized to making it a sense of place and investing in that particular area and making it something that is unique and special. And, we do a lot of downtown TIFs, but also TIFs that might span like corridors as we're proposing here. And you can do wayfinding, and I saw a great presentation on wanting to utilize funds for beautification and public art. The TIF is absolutely a great mechanism for furthering those types of programs that you're interested in. So we won't get too much into the math, but this is an example of how the current tax increment financing would work. So if your current year property tax value is $300,000, and let's say that was 2020, and the base year was 2019, and the value in 2019 was $200, then the increment would be $100. Easy math. So if we were looking at the different taxing entities, you can see here we have City of Saginaw and your tax rate. Just for the purposes of this example, we had you participating at 100%. So that means that based on that $100,000 increment, the TIF revenue into the increment would be $475, and then we continued the example down with Tarrant County participating at 50% and TCCD participating at 50%, all that to lead to a total TIF tax revenue of $660. And what this doesn't show is the TIF revenue that would continue to go into the different taxing entities' funds above and beyond what they put into the TIF fund. But we have some examples of that can show you that total taxes generated, less participation, and then it will show you the net benefit to those communities, to those taxing entities.
Is the ISD always going to be zero?
I'll let him answer this, actually. I'll call him back up here.
I think I know the answer, but I want to hear it.
A lot more.
So in 1999, the legislature kind of caught up to what some wealthy school districts, there's Chapter 41 and 42 school districts, whether they're property rich or property poor. And so what they were doing was they were able to shelter all their property within TERS districts. And so you had a whole flurry of TIFs that were created prior to September 1 of 1999. And so you have a lot of TIFs that participated at 100%, and they are passing through the city and coming back, and therefore avoiding the Robin Hood tax. Some of the major culprits were Highland Park and some other very wealthy districts that wanted to not give that money back to the state, but actually have it invested in their community. I'm going to say 99% of the time it's yes, the ISD is going to be zero because it is cost prohibitive, but it is only on their M&O side. They are more than legally able to do the INS because there is no penalty for the contribution on the INS. However, you would have to show that, but for their participation, with this project, be moving forward. So I have had success. We're doing some projects in El Paso. We did one up in Denton. It was on tax-exempt land. So if they did nothing, they were going to get nothing. And so if they did something, they were going to lose the M&O because they were property rich. But the INS, they said, we're going to get 50% of something, which is better than 100% of nothing. So I don't want to say always, but 99% of the time, most of these school districts are going to say, no, we don't do TIFs.
So some of the mechanics of how to create a TIF, Chapter 11 outlines the procedures, and there's two main documents, the creation ordinance and the TIF project and financing plan. The creation ordinance establishes 5 key elements. You have the boundary, which it does not have to be contiguous, the term, the TERS board, the city participation, and a preliminary project and financing plan. Once the creation ordinance has been approved, the TIF is created, and that sets your base year. So if you wanted to pass the creation ordinance on December 31st of 2019, that would establish the base year of 2019. But upon TIF creation, the final project and financing plan is approved by the TIF board and then the city council by separate ordinance. And with that, I will pass it on to David to talk about the feasibility analysis that we perform.
Natalie, thank you, and feel free to interrupt at any point. If I can give a couple of examples of why create a TERS, one of the reasons I wanted to be a city manager in my first job. I had an MPA from the University of North Texas, was with the city of Dallas, and after a year and a half there, I said life's too short to be a city manager. So I was in San Antonio and had an opportunity to come to Fort Worth and help run their downtown TIF. And that TIF was created in 1993. And the Bass family looked at their property values in downtown, and it was about $311 million. And they said, when's the last time the city spent any bond money in downtown? And so the city staff scrambled, and they said, it's 1972. And they said, we have some great assets. We're paying taxes into this. We're going to make some additional investments, but we don't want that money to go to Alliance. We don't want it to go to Southwest Fort Worth. So how can we create a mechanism to where the money that we generate stays for public improvements within the area? And the TERS was the natural mechanism to do that. So that's just one example. So basically, it's instead of going through your general fund process and you have your ongoing budget process, it's creating a fund that's funding improvements within that zone. And as Natalie mentioned, now we can do non-contiguous zones, so we can be very flexible. But that's probably one of the best examples of the city had neglected downtown for a long time. But basically, they paid for it themselves with the new additional development that came online. And so the TERS really helped that. With the feasibility analysis, working with your staff, we looked at a corridor and potential areas. And once again, these can be tweaked, but we looked at areas of potential growth and looking at some potential projects that y'all have potentially coming in the pipeline, and also looking at improvements along a corridor. So we would call this a corridor TIF, being the Main Street, and we've had a lot of success with those. Also, downtowns have been very successful. So I think one thing that Natalie mentioned was creating a sense of place and a commitment to the development community, that we have a mechanism in place, and if you play by the rules, we're going to be here to help. And so that's one of the key things that we looked at.
Is there any limitations on geography or amount? I mean, for example, is there one that's too small or one that's too big, or do you multiple? You said not contiguous. I mean, little islands. How does all that
State law, so a city of your size, you can do up to 50% of your taxable value into a TERS. A city over 100,000 would be, they could do no more than 30%. And also a TERS can have no more than 30% residential. And residential is defined as single family residential, 5 units or less. So that's what Chapter 311 of the state statute looks at. But we've seen, Natalie, we just did an analysis of some of our larger projects, and I think the largest one we got was probably Irving, was approaching 20%. And the reason that is because Las Colinas is all in a TIF. And so all their growth has occurred in that Las Colinas area, so a large portion of their taxable value. Now, once again, I will go back to what the governor just signed, is that cap. All that is subtracted from their rollback rate. So that is not included in that 2.5% cap. So one of the things that people are looking at as we go forward with several different TIF districts in the next 2 years. It was brought to our attention 2 major proposed developments, 27 acres along Old Decatur Road with restaurant, commercial, and multifamily, and 116 acres along Bailey Boswell Road with retail, institutional, and high-density residential uses in a public plaza. Those are the type of things that really help us, rather than getting into my crystal ball, what do I think is going to happen here over the next 20 years. We really like to be reactive to the development community, but also be consistent with what your comprehensive plan and what the city's plans are. So taking a look at that, we have a very exhaustive list of taxable value for how these properties come online. And so there's 2 different distinctions. One is what a developer says they're going to build something for, and what it shows up as the appraisal district. And so the best way for us to do it is we look at comparables within the surrounding area, and that would be Tarrant County, and say, okay, this property is comparable to this property, and so that's how we get our taxable values. And so within that first development, there's a number of different restaurants. They're not huge, but I can tell you that restaurants do carry some of the highest taxable value per square foot, and they also carry significant sales tax revenue to the city. Commercial development is another large component, but I would say that in my experience, I've been doing this for 25 years, multifamily development is probably the quickest way to drive up values within a TIF, because you build at $150,000 a unit, you build 220 units, you've got $33 million worth of increment right there. So it's significant, and it can be very significant. And so we looked at that and the timing of that. All of this is based upon, and I liked how the finance director was talking about assumptions about how we go into this. We're looking at assumptions about when this would come online. So you break ground, this year, next year, when would it come online? When would it be stabilized? We take those things into consideration. And then the other development with some medium multifamily density, a significant amount of units, and also some high density and some commercial. There's potential for $325 million worth of new incremental value, and also about $10 million worth of annual sales to occur just within those 2 developments alone. This is not considering any other developments that potentially could occur in that corridor.
Well, I'm sorry, what does stabilization year mean?
Basically we have a property comes online, and so that 13-month process that we talk about is on January 1, the appraisal district takes a snapshot, sends out those notifications, you go through appraisals, and then you get a 95% certified roll July 25th. Then you set your tax rate and you send out your tax bills on October 1. And then on January 31st, you're receiving that revenue. So a lot of times a project will be under construction. So the way they typically look at it is they go, that's about 20% complete. So we'll have several years to where a project might take 2 years to complete, or 2 years for it to fully stabilize. meaning that its sales are only at 50%. It's not at 100% operation. And so it's both on a construction completion basis, to where the appraisal district does their crude analysis of saying that's a $10 million building, I think 50% of it's complete, so at $5 million, and 13 months later that $5 million increment comes in, and then the following year they have the 100%, and then they go into there's three approaches to appraisals. As you may know, there's the cost, there's the income approach, and there's the comparable approach. The appraisal district is very good at doing the comparable approach and then pushing that. My house went up 20%. And on the market value, the appraised value is 10%, right at 10%, which is a cap. But then when you protest, then you get into, on some commercial properties, you get onto the income approach. So my project is producing $300,000 a year at a 10 cap. And so that's how they determine value. But they only do that once you get into the real nitty-gritty of going through the arbitration review board and also protesting your taxes. So we allow 3 years for a project from when somebody says they're going to be open. So we did Tanger Outlets, for example, and the Buc-ee's up there. And so it opened October of 2017. Well, January 1 of 2017, they were only about 60%, maybe even 50% complete. And so that didn't show up on the tax rolls in 18. And so it was not until really January 1 of 18, but we received that revenue in 18 that was off of 17. So we give ourselves multiple years to receive that revenue. So it's just being conservative. What we looked at, and we ran several different scenarios. Nowhere does it state that a city has to contribute 100%. That is solely determined by the city council. We ran scenarios of 50, 75, and 100% of cities' real property tax participation. And the one that we were recommending was 75%. So 75% of the increment. So you still have revenue coming into the general fund that's new revenue, and 75% going into a special fund to help facilitate development here. We've also had conversations with Tarrant County. Your neighboring communities have been successful in negotiating their participation. And so we did a TIF for Azle, and so they got participation from Tarrant County. And typically 50% is about where they're at. 50% is what they're doing we're doing the ballpark in Arlington, the new Globe Life, and so they pushed it a little bit further because it's a public-private partnership for a major sporting arena and entertainment district, so it pushed up to 70%. But for the most part, we're seeing about 50% is what the county's willing to do as far as participation. They also do speak for the JPS because they set the JPS tax rate. But the county administration and the county judge have essentially, they passed a $1.5 billion bond. And so essentially, unless there's extenuating circumstances, they don't have JPS participating because they want all that revenue to help pay off their bonds. So that's been made very clear to us when we go and meet with the county leadership. And so we are proposing 50% at Tarrant County. And Tarrant County.
So we feel pretty confident we could count on Tarrant County for something, and the TCC for something. We're pretty confident.
Yes, I've had conversations with Lisa McMillan, and she's had some conversations with Alora, and so
okay.
I think that we'd feel very confident with 50%, and I think your commissioner would be very supportive of that as well.
Does that come through the commissioner's court or the commissioner individually?
You first approach the commissioner individually, see if he's amenable to the concept. I don't think he would be opposed, and then it goes to the commissioner's court.
Okay.
And they enter into an interlocal with you. Okay. For a period of time.
Great.
And Tarrant County College has a history of also participating, and I helped them years ago write their TIF policy. So they participate up to 50% as well. So we ran scenarios of 15, 25, and 30 years. With this analysis, we were recommending 30 years because it really is, we have those two developments without getting into your crystal ball and knowing exactly what's going to happen, the 30 years gives you the best opportunity. You can always shut the TIF down early. And so I'm going to read a little bit of language from the TIF statute. The reinvestment zone terminates on the earlier of the termination date designated in the ordinance or order, or earlier or later termination by an ordinance adopted under Section 31107. So we've had several TIFs that we've had. It completed its purpose. It funded quickly. And the date when all projects cost, the increment bonds, we don't have a whole lot of TIF bonds out there. There are some projects that have TIF bonds. Grapevine Mills Mall was a bond. Colleyville had several bonds. Keller had several bonds that were related to them. But once those have been, and all obligations have been paid in full, you have even though it says 30 years, if you're done in 15, you can close that TIF. Conversely, you can also have a 15-year TIF and just add additional years if you want to. So we didn't always have that flexibility, and I can tell you that happened with the legislative session because the original projections for the Trinity River Vision were 25 years, and then started realizing, well, wait a minute, it's going to take a little bit longer to build this thing out. So you read the paper. After all obligations have been paid, any money remaining in the fund is paid to the municipality, that's paid to the municipality that created the zone and other taxing jurisdictions in the proportion to the municipality and the other units' respective share of the total amount of tax increment. So basically, once you close down that fund, if there's any money left, you just return it pro rata of what they put in. So we created a little bit of a matrix looking over a 15-year period at 50, 75, and 100%. 25-year period, and then the 30-year period. If we did 75% on a 30-year period with this corridor, so as Natalie mentioned before, there's just two ways to create increment. Appreciation, just your natural appreciation of properties, which you have with development. As new development occurs, property gets more expensive, and therefore that's reflected. But mostly it's through new construction. That you would have $57 million potentially within that area. And that's just with those two developments and with a modest 2% annual growth on your base value.
That brings up a good question. I think on this map, if I look at it correctly, Gabe, you've got Wayside in there as well? We can put one that's not on the tax rolls now, but may be in the future?
That's correct.
Okay, good.
You can always amend a TIF to add additional property. However, the year in which you add or adjust the boundary, it creates a sub-zone. So if next year, let's say you created a TIF this year with this zone, but had a specific property you wanted to add, and you did it in 2020, its base year would be January 1st of 2020 going forward. So you would have two separate bases that you track. And so the downtown TIF in Fort Worth has 3 different bases, and the Trinity River Vision has, I believe, 4 different bases. So you can be as creative as you would like to be when you get into that. Now, this is a question that was asked before. What can these dollars be spent for? And as Natalie stated, it's basically anything that you can put into the terms of what is public works, what is a public project, what is a public purpose. When we did TIFs years ago, that flurry of TIFs that came in prior to 1999, they would go to all the engineers and say, okay, what's every need we have? And so it was very delineated within the TIF plan. We have found that basically we afford the TIF board the opportunity that you can fund anything that's within the TIF statute. And one of the little caveats is we now have the ability to do economic development grants. So typically we would always try to fund what's infrastructure based first. What are those things that you need? Water, sanitary sewer, park, street improvements, public facilities. But if we can't do that, we have the ability to do economic development grants. And so Y'all have done some Chapter 380s in the past? Maybe? Yeah. One active and one pending, and basically that's just a chapter under the local government code that says you can do anything with public dollars if it increases the business and commercial activity within a zone. And so that power is now within the TIF, and that was added about 10 years ago. And so, but that is only limited to city funds. So the first time we sit down with the county, they'll say, we can't participate in that economic development grants. But what we like to say is this is a menu of options. And so Natalie will make fun of me, but one of my clients put this very well, is there's two mother may I's. Once you put a TIF in place, is you have the TIF in place, you're accumulating an increment, or you have the potential to accumulate an increment. Developers, projects come forward. They have to come to the staff. So there's really three mother may I's. Be vetted by staff, be brought forward to the TIF board, approved by the TIF board, meet one of these categories, and then that is a recommendation to City Council. So that's the two mother may I's before there's a final development.
Who is on the I didn't ask this, who's on the TIF board or the TERS board? How does that work?
The TIF board can be between 5 and 15 members. By statute, each taxing jurisdiction other than the city that participates gets one seat. So what we like to do is, because the city council is the ultimate gatekeeper, we have the city council as the TIF board, and then if the county and TCC were to participate, they'd each have a participant, and so they're a recommending body. So I always like to say you're wearing your city council hat, you turn on backwards, you're wearing your TIF hat, and then you come back into city council, and then you're approving the action you just took. It's kind of like a local development corporation, but you have the input of the other taxing jurisdictions as well on how their money's spent.
Now, on the project side here, so we don't have to upfront say, I think we're going to do this, this, and this. We can, as we go and as we learn, as things grow, we can add or subtract. Or
most of the TIFs that we work on are pay-as-you-go TIFs. It's not until the money is in there, or if you have a developer that's coming forward and says, okay, I'm going to pull building permits for X amount of commercial space, we can project what kind of increment's going to be coming in, and you would word the agreement in such a way that we will reimburse you for public infrastructure that you paid for on a performance-based. If you produce it, we will pay you back. And so all the burden is on the developer, not the city. We have had circumstances like in Arlington when we first did you remember they wanted to do Glory Park, the big project that was there around 2005. They were going to build a big entertainment retail development, and the recession kind of killed it. But that in itself, they had some improvements that they needed to do for the Cowboy Stadium, and so they were matching grants, and so they floated bonds, but it was stuff that they were going to have to do anyway because it was a 50% match with TxDOT. So there's some circumstances that are out there like that, but for the most part, we want to keep these simple. And so we don't obligate them by doing any TIF or anything like that because, once again, it really is hard to predict the future. And so until you have that money in hand, don't count on it. And so any future TERS cost allocations would be evaluated, as I mentioned, on a case-by-case basis, and then consistent with the categories, and then brought forward to the TERS board, City Council, for consideration. So what we like to look at is the total taxes generated less the participation. So we ran a 30-year, and we had a 75 city and a 50% Tarrant County and TCC. So you're generating $285 million. You're putting 57 into a special fund to fund specific projects. And so your net benefit is 228. So of that 57 that's generated by the city, 37 is going into the TIF, but also $19 million is going into the general fund. So you could very easily just do 50-50, 50% participation. And so those are some of the further analysis that we can certainly do. And one of the questions that we get a lot is, well, would this development occur, without the TERS? And so we have history that we can look back upon, and we have some success stories. And I think Natalie had put it best in front of one of our clients that really it's the timing and it's the quality of the development that you want to occur. The TIF can really help advance the timing. So rather than just waiting for the traditional market to get here, developers are very used to working with TIFs, and you can also, because of these development agreements, ask for additional quality that otherwise they would just have to meet your standard, performance benchmarks that you have for your city permitting process. Did I capture that correct? Was there a third one too that you had? It was just those two? And so what we found was that utilizing the information outlined in this feasibility, that a TIF is economically feasible and could provide the city and other taxing jurisdictions with economic benefits that would occur, that would not occur without its implementation. Participation rates, those type of things, we can certainly take further look at. But once again, I say it over and over again, 50% of something's better than 100% of nothing. And so I'll say that once more. But this next steps, if you were to move forward to create a TERS, one is to prepare a preliminary TERS, TIF project and financing plan. That's outlined, and it has several statutory requirements that you have to meet. And it's basically a report that basically says I've met this criteria. I'm not putting more than 50% of the taxable value of the city into the overall zone. I'm not doing this. I'm not doing that. And then there's a creation ordinance. As Natalie mentioned, that has a boundary term, TERS board, city participation, and then a preliminary project and financing plan. That creation ordinance requires a 7-day public notice that runs in a paper of general circulation. And so you have a public hearing, and you talk about the benefits of a TERS and allow the public to speak for or against. And then if it is created, then you have the TERS board approve the final project and financing plan, and then we come back to the city council. So there's two separate documents that adopts by ordinance a project and financing plan. And so that becomes essentially your roadmap for how you move forward over those several years that you've basically committed. And so with that, be happy to answer any questions. I know that's a lot of information, a lot of acronyms, but hopefully we can have some examples if you have any questions. And just thank you for the opportunity to be here.
Council questions?
I do have a question, Mayor. Sure. And I'm trying to, I see it in my head and I'm trying to convert it into words. This is still relatively new to me and I'm in a fog, but I'm looking at the map that you have of the TERS number 1. It covers, a good sized portion of the city. A lot of it's either undeveloped or probably not as well developed as it could be. You also have the areas that we're talking about that are proposed developments. And if I look at your proposal, that's probably where the lion's share of the money would come from, for those proposed developments?
Correct.
Okay. So if we, I've got the wrong presentation here, if this will work for me.
Natalie, can you pull the base for me?
So
it should be in that plan.
I think I closed it.
So
if I look at the presentation and I go down to slide number, it's the one that had the breakdown of 20% or 15% for street improvements. And
oh, yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. That would be page 18.
Then I'm impressed that you know that off the top of your head. Yes. And so we're looking at, just shy of $10,000 for the water, sanitary, sewer. But that's going to be in the area that probably is not going to be contributing a lot of money to the TERS. as is parking improvements and street and intersections improvements. So they would benefit from everything that those two proposed developments would be doing. And personally, I'd like to see more contributed to that, just because, those areas are in pretty bad shape. But how do we justify to those proposed developments that, okay, we're going to be taking advantage of the money that you're bringing in to help somebody that's on the other end of town?
And I want to first say that this is a menu that this does not indicate. This is our kind of formulaic approach. We do it on a case-by-case needs basis. And so if there is a savings in one line item or a cost overrun in one line item, you theoretically could have everything in water, sewer, and drainage under this plan. We are just providing you with the menu of all the things that you could fund. But back to your question, which is a basic question. These dollars are dollars, they're not paying additional taxes. So
Right.
These are dollars that are going to be coming in. It is the city's decision about where those funds are being spent. And so using their money to go to benefit another area of town is really a council decision, because that's kind of like me going up. I have a house in the city of Fort Worth and saying, I want my money, and here's how much I paid in taxes. I want all of it spent on my street.
Right.
Those are council decisions. And so they're not paying any additional taxes, and so they are the public's dollars. And so as public policy, those are public policy decisions that you make about how those dollars are to be spent. And so the TIF just says that you can spend those within this area. And so you're capturing within that area. And you can actually spend the dollars if you wanted to do it in a non-contiguous. You wanted to add another just area outside of that. It's similar to the way you do your budgeting process now. I'm sure you have your, I don't know what your top 10 ad valorem producing properties are, but probably not all of their taxes are going to benefit them. They're going to benefit the overall city. So that would be the answer that I would have to them, is that they're going to probably have some needs because they come in and they're going to have a lot of demands on the system, water, sewer, drainage, and it comes into the timeliness about how they build that out. Can we advance that by applying some of those funds? And can we also improve the quality of that development?
And one of the things I haven't mentioned, but I used to be with the economic development team at the city of Fort Worth, so I understand sometimes what staff is, when they have those initial conversations. One thing that's important to understand is that a TIF is not an entitlement incentive. And so just because you are doing a project within the TIF does not mean that you are entitled to TIF funds. And so a lot of times that's something that we have to communicate, that they still have to go forward in order to receive TIF funding. And so that's something else that I would say, is that just because you do a development within the TIF, those funds go to the TIF board to use at their discretion. As David mentioned, there's no guarantee that just because you do a development within the TIF that you're going to receive some sort of incentive for your project or whatever it may be that you're doing within it.
And as a former TIF administrator, you love projects that came to you, or that came into your district and didn't ask for anything, because you could use those monies in areas that you had needs. But most likely when developers acknowledge that, I have these needs, we have some underwriting criteria of, is this reasonable? And that's all we really ask of this. Is this a reasonable request of what we're asking for the city, or is this unreasonable? And could the TIF pay for some of those costs to help advance that ad valorem taxes coming online and producing some of that sales tax? And can we also increase the quality, so 10 years down the road, we don't have an asset within the city that's going to require reinvestment?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, council, any other questions? Well, thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Natalie.
Matt.
Appreciate it. Great information. Oh, sorry, that covers item number 9. So at 7:14, reconvene back into regular session. Item 11 is executive session, which I do not believe is required. Hallelujah. Item 12 is adjournment.
Mayor, I make a motion, we adjourn.
All those in favor? 7:14, we are done. Thank y'all.